Way number 37 is very similar to the previous way. Way number 37 is Eino Sameach Behora. Someone who's not happy, not joyous in rendering rulings. If you have a great sage, someone who knows a lot of Torah, other people come and consult with them. What's the halacha? What's the law? What does the Torah say about this and this situation, this and this circumstance? And if you are a Torah sage, well, you're gonna reference what the Torah says about a given circumstance, and you'll be able to convey that forward. You'll be able to render a ruling. How is it supposed to make you feel when you render a ruling? Eino sameach behora. Someone is not happy. Someone's not enthusiastic about being a judge, being an arbiter, about rendering a ruling. That is actually a way to wisdom. So the previous way to wisdom was to not have a swelled heart, to not be so confident and cocky about how much you know. And here we see that how that manifests itself. Many of the commentaries connect way number 36 and way number 37. How does it manifest itself where you're not so happy? You're not so confident. You're not so cocky about your ruling because, well, you're humble enough to know that, well, maybe you made a mistake. And you're not prideful enough to think that you know so much. A way to achieve more Torah is to maintain a degree of uncertainty and lack of confidence when rendering a ruling. And the truth is, as we shall see, there are endless variables that can be part of a given discussion. Someone asks you a halachic question. In effect, they're telling you, I want you to scan all the books of the Talmud and all the commentaries and the Jerusalem Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, and the Rambam, and the Shulchan Aruch, and all the commentaries. And tell me everything that could possibly be a factor or a variable in this question. To know all of that, you have to be a real master. And to not know that maybe you missed something. And how many different episodes and stories and narratives and rulings in the Talmud that you don't immediately connect to this question at hand, they may be quite relevant. And you don't even know. You didn't make that connection. If you open up the works of responsa, the response literature, the Shilas V'Tshuvos, there's thousands, tens of thousands of books of responsa. Responsa means you ask a question to a great sage, and the great sage will analyze the situation and give a response, a halachic ruling. And what's amazing is that the connections that the great sages find. You think a question about the laws of Shabbos. If I study the book of Shabbos, I'll know the laws. Yeah, but every single other book in the Talmud also has some discussion about Shabbos. And if you miss that, well, you might have missed a very important factor in this dilemma. And if you're happy, you're ruling, I know this for sure, I'm happy, here you go, spit it out. You're ignoring the fact that the Torah is vaster than what you think it is. And you're maybe a bit too confident, and you're not appreciating the depth and the breadth and the scope of Torah. And what's amazing is that the Talmud records that even the sages of the Talmud, this is 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, the sages were on a completely different stratosphere than the sages we have today. And even the sages of the Talmudic era were reluctant to render rulings if the questioner wanted to know only the opinion of Torah. You come to a sage, I don't want your opinion. I want the opinion of Torah exclusively. Sage says, I'm not going to do that to you. Because it's possible there's parts of Torah that I'm not even aware are pertinent to this question. So the sages of 2,000 years ago, they were unwilling to commit that their rulings were 100% aligned with the opinion of the Torah. Because again, the variables are endless. There's a famous and quite humorous episode that happened about 100 years ago, a little more, probably more than 120 years ago, with the great Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik was one of the great Talmudic minds of recent years, recent eras. And in fact, he was the pioneer behind the system of Talmudic study that dominates the yeshiva world today. He created a revolution in intense and penetrating analysis of the Talmud that is the method, the primary method that is used in all yeshivos, almost all yeshivas today. And he was the head of the yeshiva in Volozhin. And then when it shuttered, he moved just to the city of Brest Litovsk, as it's known, in Lithuania and Russia. And he was the rabbi there, and the great students from all over the world would coalesce by him to study by him. So he had like an unofficial yeshiva in his hometown. But he was very reluctant to render any halachic ruling. Why? Because he could see both sides of every question and could prove both sides. And Talmud even tells a story about Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, any dilemma, he would have 149, 150 proofs one way, 150 proofs the other way. So how do you have a ruling? You need to be a little bit ignorant to render a ruling. You have to rely on the sages, rely on the sources. But the story goes that it was by his son's wedding or wedding celebration. I read different versions of the story. There's a few different versions. The story got embellished. But it was a celebration related to the wedding of his son. It was either the wedding or it was the Sheva Brachos, the after-wedding celebration. And there was a big pot of meat that was going to be served. And a little bit of non-kosher meat fell inside of it. The meat fell in, and then they quickly scooped up the meat, but a little bit of the meat or the flavor went in now. So is this pot kosher or not? That's a important halachic question. Today we go to the HEB and you get kosher meat. It's very inexpensive relatively. But people today are living relatively affluent lives. And, you think about the times in the shtetl, people had very, very little meat. Maybe a little bit of chicken for Shabbos. There's this big pot of meat now for the celebration. I was looking forward to it. A little bit of non-kosher meat fell inside of it. You quickly scoop it out, but there are halachos of, okay, well, there's some now non-kosher flavor in it. And how much meat fell in, and how much flavor fell in, and what percentage of it is, and is it nullified? There's a principle that there is the nullification. When something becomes negligible, a tiny little drop, you have a huge pot of meat, a tiny drop of milk falls inside of it. The meat's still kosher because the milk is considered to be negligible. It's less than a 60th. It's like, less than 1%. It's like negligible. Just like, when you read on the label, it says that it has no high fructose corn syrup. It has 1 or 2 or 3% or 5%, but that's not enough to register. The government says, well, that's negligible. So there's a halachic principle of something being negligible from a halachic perspective, and therefore it's not considered to be, it wouldn't render it non-kosher. So a little bit of meat fell in. Is it kosher or not kosher? And there were a bunch of rabbis there. Everyone wanted to render their opinion. So they weren't sure exactly what percentage of the meat had fallen. Was it a 60th or was it not a 60th? Which adds another variable to it. It may or may not have been a 60th. If it's more than a 60th, well, then it's not negligible. If it's less than a 60th, then it is negligible. We don't know how much it is. We didn't measure it. So what now? So one of the rabbis there says, well, we have a principle. There's a lot of inside baseball here going on over here. We have a principle called Safek Derabanan Legula. When there is a matter of doubt of rabbinic severity, not biblical severity, the rabbis made a decree, we got to follow it, but there are certain rules. If you're unsure, if there's a suffix, there's a doubt, there's an uncertainty, then we tend to be lenient when it's a rabbinic circumstance versus when it's a real Torah law, original Torah law, then even in case of doubt, we are machmir, we are stringent. So here there's a question of min b'mino. Min b'mino. When the mixture is two of the same type, you have kosher meat, non-kosher meat, but they're both bovine meat. One of them wasn't slaughtered properly. Or it was slaughtered properly, was found to be a treifa afterwards. So it's not like it's pig and cow meat. It's cow meat and cow meat. So that's a case of min b'mino, it's rabbinic, and therefore it's a suffix, it's a doubt. In the case of a doubt, we are lenient. And all the rabbis agree, 100%, lenient, everyone can eat the meat. And Rabbi Soloveitch says, yeah, that's true. But because that meat that was slaughtered and found to be a treifa, it was not kosher. So it wasn't processed in the kosher fashion. And it wasn't salted properly. So therefore there's probably a little bit of blood in it. Kosher meat's always salted to remove the blood. Non-kosher meat's not salted. Or at least not salted to remove the blood with the same severity that you would remove blood from meat that you're going to eat. So it is true that the meat is min b'mino. It's the same thing, meat and meat, but there's also blood. And blood is not the same thing as the meat, and therefore it is of Torahitic, a case of a doubt of Torahitic stringency, and therefore if it's a suffix, if it's uncertainty, well, we should be machmir. It should be prohibited. So, oh, you're right, it's prohibited. And he says, no, maybe it's not prohibited. Because it's cooked blood, and cooked blood is all rabbinically prohibited, so it should be permitted. He says, yeah, well, it's not, from the perspective of the animal, it's, the blood from a treifa would be biblically prohibited, because he brings a source that says that food that emerges from a non-kosher source is not kosher. So even though from the blood perspective, it is maybe not a problem because it was cooked, but from the fact that it's yotze mina asa, which is a different halachic category, it should be prohibited on that grounds. And the story goes on and on. Every argument that they presented, he brought a counter argument, and so on. And this is just an example. There's a lot of lore about this story because the details. I Googled and tried to find the details because I don't want to give you guys the story that's not precise. But there's a few different versions of what exactly the arguments were. But the point is that it's very, very hard to say with definitiveness you've covered every single aspect of the Torah in rendering a halachic ruling. So if you're very joyous, you're confident, you're not according the Torah sufficient respect. By the way, in the end, they had to forego the meat. They didn't eat the meat. That's the end of the story. But it goes on. There's a few different variables that are present in that story. I will tell you, this Rabbi Soloveitch, even though he was the rabbi of the city, he didn't render rulings because of this, because he could see all the different angles. But we have a policy in the Torah that when a rabbinic figure, a bona fide rabbinic figure, renders a ruling, well, that's the ruling, and that's what you follow. So when he would ask his questions to Rabbi Spector, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector was considered the greatest rabbi of the generation, he would say to him, listen, I want an answer, but make it one word answers. Yes or no. Permitted, prohibited. Because if you give me all your arguments, I might be able to disprove them. But if the rabbi gives me a ruling, okay, I can follow that ruling. So he would say, send me a telegram with one word. Yes, no, mutter, aser, and so on. Permitted, prohibited. Don't give me your rationale, because rationale I'll be able to disprove it. Again, because the Torah is that vast, and there are so many potential variables, and in every halachic dilemma, there is an ocean of different perspectives that can be presented. And that's why it's very important that, first of all, why we rely on our antecedents. When you have the sages from years past, they knew so much more Torah than you could even fathom. they give a ruling, that is something that you can rely upon. Because you're in effect saying that this incredible master of Torah, they came out with a ruling that is reliable. Rely on them, not on your own mastery. See, interesting, even in the times of the Talmud records a prayer that one of the sages of the Talmud would say every time he entered the Beis Medrash, the academy. His prayer was, let me not make any mistakes. Let me not say something which is really permitted that it's prohibited, or vice versa. Something which is pure, let me not say that it is impure, or vice versa. The sages were very not confident. It would be foolish for us to be confident, and again, it would be counterproductive. Because we're going to stay on a very surface level and not study more and more and more to gain more and more insight and more information about the Torah and about a given circumstance, a given ruling. The Talmud actually says, no sage has ever gotten it right from the beginning. That the nature of Torah is such that when you start off, you are not only prone to make mistakes, you are definitely going to make mistakes. There's no other way to achieve mistake-free rulings, only if you start with making mistakes. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Because again, it's so vast that your initial assessment is guaranteed to be wrong. Guaranteed. And even once you've gone through that, there's no guarantee that you're going to graduate from that. You start off making blunders, there's no guarantee that you're going to cease making blunders. So again, the possibility of mistakes are endemic to this Torah. You can be happy rendering ruling. You're so sure, you're so confident that you got it all. You covered every base. Really? There are 2 citations in the literature that talk about rendering rulings. One of them talks about someone who is not qualified. They're not qualified. They're not mature in their studies. They haven't studied enough. They're not advanced enough. They're not qualified. But they are irrationally confident and they render rulings nonetheless. It's a big problem. And the Talmud says, they are like a murderer. That's how severe it is. You're going to render a ruling without having the proper aptitude and experience and tutelage. It's murder. Very, very harsh language that the sages use for someone who's not qualified and renders ruling nonetheless. On the flip side, you have someone who is qualified and they don't want to render a ruling. They're scared, justifiably so. We've seen, even the sages were sages of the Talmud were scared. The Talmud, we talked about this in the past, Talmud says that when you render a ruling, you're imagining in your head that there's knives everywhere. And if I don't tiptoe on the right path, I'm going to get slashed. That's how serious you have to take this process of rendering a ruling. It's life and death. So you're a great sage and you are qualified. You don't want to do it. It's too scary. Talmud says, in that case, also you're like a murderer. If you're not qualified, don't rule. If you are qualified, you cannot shirk this responsibility. You have to rule. As terrifying as it is. And if you don't, that is, again, in the words of the Talmud, it's akin to murder on some level. Certainly that means that no one's eager to do it. Even the ones who are qualified are not so happy about this. I remember when I was in high school, we had one of the Rabbeim, one of the Judaic instructors. He was a great sage. He knew it all. And he was one of the, in addition to his role in the yeshiva, He was also the rabbi, the pulpit rabbi of one of the big established shuls in our city. And he would always say, I don't paskin. Unless you're a paying member, you're a member of my shul, I'm not going to give you a ruling. He knew it all. Like if he doesn't, he would rule, but okay, he was very reluctant to do it. And he would tell us, I'm not going to give you a psak. Go ask someone else. And that's appropriate. He would rule maybe in the capacity that he was officially hired to do, he would do that. But he's not excited to do it and certainly not happy about it. And that's way number 37. But again, there's two ways in the words of the Talmud, to murder in this fashion. If you know and don't rule, if you don't know and you do rule. And I'll end up with this very nice observation. The aforementioned Gaon of Vilna, who discovered 2,260 interpretations of one verse in Numbers. He only lived 200 some odd years ago, 250 years ago. You read his writings, you see the connections that he made. My goodness. Listen to this one. In the 10 Commandments, there are two very famous words. Lo sirtzach, do not murder. Thou shalt not murder. It's one of the 10 Commandments. Pretty straightforward. It's only two words. Lo sirtzach, do not murder. Thou shalt not murder. You'll notice something very, very subtle. You have to really study. You have to really squint to see this. There's something called Tam Elyon. Tam Elyon. What that means is that there's 10 commandments, but not all the commandments are standalone verses. Some of them are multiple verses. To not do idolatry, second commandment, it's a few verses. Shabbos, it's a few verses. So how do you read it from a Torah scroll? Do you read it in the system of verses where every commandment could be split up into a bunch of verses? That's the way it's featured you open up a chumash, and you'll see that it's just verses. And there's one way of reading it. The standard way of reading it is the way it's presented in the chumash. However, when they read it in shul on Shabbos, they read it with what's known as Tam Elyon, which is a different way of reading. We read the Torah, there's the cantillation marks, the Tamim, which it's effectively it's like the punctuation marks of the verses. But it tells you the right way to chant it. And the way it's presented in the Chumash is one way, and there's the Tam Elyon, which is the different way, the alternate way, in which every single one of the commandment is its own verse. So you'll have some of them that are very, very long verses, or apparent verses, because there is no period, so to speak, until the end. And it could be 3-4 verses. And the Tam Elyon, it only ends the sentence once the entire one of the commandment, once the entire commandment is finished. I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but anyhow, there's Tam Elyon, Tam Tachton, two different ways to read it. But the words are all the same, right? It's just the cantillation marks and the punctuation marks are different. However, when it says lo sirtzach, thou shalt not murder, in one it says lo sirtzach, and in one it says lo sirtzach. And one means thou shalt not murder, and one means thou shalt not murder. It means the same thing. It means the same thing. But one's spelled with a kamatz, sirtzach, and one's spelled with a patach, sirtzach. Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not murder. What is the difference between lo sirtzach with the kamatz and lo sirtzach with a patach? We have no idea. It means the same thing, right? The words mean the same thing. Sirtzach, it's the same word. Don't murder. So why is one spelled with a kamatz, one spelled with a patach? We don't know. Comes along the Gaon of Vilna and says, Patach, Poteach, which is the name of the Nakuda of Lo Sirtzach, Patach. It means to open. Poteach, open. Petach, an opening. Patach means to open. Lo sirtzach, with the kamatz means to close. A kamitza is to close. Gaon Vilna says that this is hinting to us of the two types of murder. There's a murder when you open, someone who doesn't know, and they open their mouth, and they teach, even though they don't know, they're really ruling. It's like a murderer. And kamatz is when someone closes. They do know, and they don't open their mouth. That's also a type of murder. Hinted to again in this. This is a level of insight, of penetrating insight, of scrutiny into the Torah that we cannot fathom. The different ways that it's pronounced in the Tam Elyon and Tam Tachton of the Ten Commandments, Lo Sirtzach versus Lo Sirtzach to us, we wouldn't even notice it for sure. And if we did notice it, we wouldn't be able to determine why. And of course, we may say, oh, okay, it doesn't matter. That's a mistake. Everything matters. Everything is with utmost precision. And the Gaon Vilna is able to reveal to us, well, the Talmud says that there's two types of murderer. One who opens their mouth when they shouldn't. One who closes their mouth when they shouldn't. And that's hitting to kamatz means to close. Patach means to open. There's two ways to achieve murder in rendering rulings. That's hinted to in the difference between the Tam Elyon and Tam Tachton of the Ten Commandments. Fascinating stuff. But this is the way number 37. When you're a judge, hopefully you're worthy to do that. And don't render rulings if you're not worthy. But even then, Eino samech behora. You're not happy, you're not enthusiastic about it. Why? Because you realize how vast Torah is. When you realize how vast Torah is and how prone you are to make mistakes, you will study more. And thus, this is a way to wisdom, a way to achieve Torah. Way number 37. Eino sameach behora. My email address is rabbi.wolbe@gmail.com. I look forward to your questions, your comments, and your feedback.